It is said that this is the most expensive original screenplay in the entire history of films. Back then, the production company spent a full $4.5 million just to obtain the filming rights. What's even more shocking is that at the start of filming, in order to perfectly present the grand and brilliant story in the screenplay, the production company spent a total of $470 million on the budget. You can see how awesome the story inside must be. This movie starring Denzel Washington is the mind-bending masterpiece Déjà Vu that even a million fans were unable to understand after racking their brains over it to this day. So without further ado, let's dive into it. The story takes place in 2006 in the state of Florida. It was during the annual Mardi Gras celebration when a group of new Navy recruits boarded a cruise ship with their families to celebrate the festival's arrival. However, what no one expected was that the cruise ship had barely departed from the port when a huge explosion occurred, killing over 500 people on board. This incident immediately caused a huge uproar, and the government dispatched Doug, a veteran explosives investigator from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, to the scene. Although he had witnessed many major incidents before, seeing rows of heavily burned corpses in front of him still gave Doug an unprecedented shock. He then found a burnt blue fragment at the scene, with some wires hidden inside. Combined with the thick smoke produced by the explosion and the smell, it could now be confirmed that this was an intentionally manufactured terrorist attack. Back at the ATF Bureau, a colleague told Doug that a few hours ago, a woman had called him and seriously inquired about his height and appearance details, sounding like she had encountered some urgent situation.
Say, that girl ever get a hold of you?
What girl?
You know, sexy voice, asked if you were tall, dark, and handsome. I gave her 2 out of 3.
2 out of 3, that's very good. Hit play.
Thank you.
After hearing this, Doug had a vague feeling that it might be related to the cruise ship explosion case, so he quickly called back, but the voicemail said no one was available. Reluctantly, he left a voice message for the person.
Agent Doug Carlin, returning your call. My cell number is 504-555-0130.
And that very afternoon, the police discovered a floating female corpse near the docks. The woman's name was Claire, her body was heavily burned, and her 5 fingers had been cleanly severed. At first, both Doug and the police thought Claire was a victim of the cruise ship explosion. However, after detecting traces of tape around her mouth and based on the time her body was discovered, the coroner immediately dismissed this idea. Claire's body was found at 10:40 a.m., while the cruise explosion happened at 10:50 a.m., clearly 2 separate incidents. However, the experienced Doug still sensed something was amiss. Only a 10-minute difference between the 2 cases, it absolutely could not be a coincidence. Doug boldly guessed that the cruise explosion was likely intentionally caused by the killer to cover up this murder case. Claire must have discovered the killer's unknown plan, which is why she was killed to silence her. Based on this analysis, Doug decided to go to Claire's home to investigate further.
She's beautiful. Yeah, very.
As soon as he entered, the phrase "you can save him" made from fridge magnets was right in front of Doug's eyes, as if someone had expected him to come. He then noticed a car sales ad also stuck on the fridge. Additionally, in the room's trash can, he discovered some blood-stained gauze. What shocked Doug even more was that in the voicemail, he found the call he had made that morning. It turned out Claire was the one who had called him.
Yeah, this is ATF Agent Doug Carlin, returning your call. My cell number is 504-555-0130.
Doug immediately reported this back to the Bureau. Combined with the police investigation, they deduced the bomber must have first hidden the bomb in a car, then used that vehicle as transport cargo to carry out the cruise bombing. And this car was likely the one Claire had been trying to sell. Doug was convinced that by following this lead, they would definitely be able to track down the bomber. And as they were talking, Doug noticed his colleague Ross's car parked outside, so he thought to call Ross to join the investigation.
Where's Larry?
What?
Larry Minuti, my partner. That's his car right there. Is he here?
But at that moment, he was informed by the police that Ross had died in that morning's cruise explosion, and his body had already been processed. This news hit Doug like a thunderbolt, because Ross was not only his colleague, but a brother who had been through life and death together.
They're the vehicles that belonged to the victims.
While Doug was still immersed in grief, a special operations team found him and took him to a heavily guarded military base. The person in charge believed that with Doug's exceptional reasoning abilities, he would be crucial in helping them identify the bomber.
Why me? I need someone who can look at a crime scene exactly one time. Tell us what we need to pursue.
According to the person in charge, they had access to a kind of machine that could review events from 4 days ago. Combined with satellite monitoring, they could clearly see everything that happened 4 days prior. However, this black technology could not fast-forward or rewind. All the details could only be observed once, after which they would permanently disappear.
Why do you got to look at 4 days ago? Why don't you just fast-forward it to the day of the explosion? I don't understand what...
You have to wait. It takes 4.5 days to render this single fluid shot.
Yeah, we can't go back 10 minutes.
The only thing that matters is that we have exactly one look at any one time.
As Doug carefully examined the footage from 4 days earlier, he unexpectedly received a call from a colleague questioning why Doug had left his fingerprints in Claire's room during the investigation, despite being an experienced agent. Doug was instantly puzzled upon hearing this, as he clearly remembered wearing gloves at the time. But he couldn't dwell on that now. At this moment, Claire's figure appeared on the screen. Strangely, it seemed like she could sense someone was spying on her.
Hello?
Doug tried using a laser pointer to signal the screen, and sure enough, Claire also saw the laser beam, causing the entire base to suddenly lose power. When it came back on, Doug was furious, believing the authorities must have hidden something, as what just happened was too bizarre.
I pointed this thing at her just now, and she responded to it from 4.5 days ago. Explain that to me.
Seeing they could no longer conceal it, the staff admitted that this time machine was by Cambridge University. It could fold 2 different spacetimes, meaning, simply put, it was like folding a sheet of paper. The 2 ends would then overlap, except the time period they occupied differed by 4 days. What they were watching on the screen wasn't a recording, but actually real events happening 4 days in the past. Hearing this, Doug was full of doubts. He questioned that if the laser pointer could penetrate the past, why not just send a person back to prevent the explosion from happening in the first place? The staff explained that all matter transmission experiments had failed so far because it would consume an enormous amount of energy. The laser pointer had only caused a full facility power outage. But to stop the bombing, Doug still wanted to try.
You cannot change the past. It's physically impossible.
Maybe you're right. Maybe you guys are exactly right. I don't know. All I know is this. For once in my life, I'd like to catch somebody before they do something horrible, all right?
After his repeated insistence, the staff finally decided to send a note with clues written on it back 4 days in the past. As long as the past Doug saw the note, it might prevent the explosion. After doing all this, the facility lost power again. The next scene showed the note had indeed been transmitted back 4 days ago. However, Doug had not been in the office at that time. His colleague Ross found the note instead. Realizing the severity of the situation, Ross immediately drove towards the docks. Just as the suspect was about to be caught, gunshots rang out, and Ross was the first one struck down. The killer then stuffed Ross into the trunk and sped off. Watching this unfold on the screen, Doug was filled with self-blame. He never imagined Ross's death was actually caused by his own actions. But he had no time to grieve now. Since this black technology had limited monitoring range, and the killer was about to move out of view, Doug directly put on an iCam to continue tracking him. This iCam device looked simple, but could independently capture images without range limitations. With the powerful engine of the Humvee, Doug pursued the killer relentlessly. However, since his left eye saw the footage from 4 days ago while his right saw the present reality, this pursuit was extremely challenging. A series of traffic accidents occurred along the way, but fortunately Doug was able to adjust just in time with the staff's guidance to not lose the target.
I can see him. He's right in front of me.
Finally, he followed the killer to a remote rural area. Doug carefully entered the abandoned house, which was in complete disarray from the bombing aftermath. But then he noticed a charred mark on the ground. This seemed to be where the killer had burned Ross alive 4 days earlier. At the same time, the killer's car stood out too much due to all the bullet holes, so he had to switch to another vehicle before carrying out the cruise bombing. That's when he happened to notice Claire's car sale ad, leading to her eventual murder. Now it seemed Claire's death was actually caused by Doug's intervention.
Yeah, we changed one thing, but by changing one thing, we didn't change anything.
But this operation wasn't completely fruitless. The investigation team managed to get a clear look at the bomber's face. Using facial recognition, the police quickly apprehended the suspect named Erstad. Facing Doug's interrogation, Erstad confessed his crimes. His motive was simple: he had dreamed of becoming a Navy sailor since childhood, but was rejected by the military, so he decided to bomb the Navy Celebration cruise out of revenge. Erstad also uttered a profound philosophy.
And anyone who tries to alter that destiny will be destroyed. Anyone who tries to stop it from happening will cause it to happen.
Doug listened, completely baffled, clearly not yet grasping the meaning of those words. He then left the interrogation room. At this point, the case had been solved. By rights, Doug's work should have ended, but once back in his office watching the past footage of Claire, he made a bold decision to actually transmit himself back 4 days in an attempt to stop the bombing and save Claire. The staff sternly warned him against this extremely dangerous idea, as failed transmission would simply send a dead body to the past. But after listening, Doug remained adamant. He then entered the time machine without hesitation. Accompanied by the lights suddenly going out, Doug was transmitted to a hospital. The confused doctors, despite their surprise at what had just occurred, had no choice but to rush and provide emergency treatment given the grave situation. When Doug regained consciousness, there were only 2 hours left until the bombing. He immediately got into an ambulance and rushed straight to the abandoned house. The scene then shifted to show the bomber Erstad had already stolen Claire's car and was preparing to kill her. Claire desperately fought back, breaking free from her restraints and scratching Erstad's face, completely enraging him. He grabbed a pair of scissors, intending to cut off Claire's 5 fingers. At the critical moment, Doug drove the ambulance straight in. Seeing this, Erstad angrily opened fire, one shot hitting Doug's shoulder. He then ruthlessly detonated a gas canister before frantically fleeing the scene. At the same time, after rescuing Claire, Doug quickly gave chase, as there was only 1 hour left until the bombing. However, due to his gunshot wound, Doug had to first stop at Claire's home to treat his injury. Since he had been transmitted from the future, Doug was extremely familiar with the layout and swiftly found the alcohol for disinfecting. But to Claire, all of this seemed highly abnormal, so she held him at gunpoint demanding to know who he really was. Doug hurriedly explained he was from the ATF Bureau, which could be verified by calling them. Claire made the skeptical call inquiring about Doug's height and appearance details. Only after receiving confirmation did she finally lower her guard.
Are you gonna tell me the truth?
What if you had to tell someone the most important thing in the world, but you knew they'd never believe you?
I try.
The two then headed to the docks where the bombing was about to occur. Sure enough, they saw the red car loaded with the bomb had already been transported onto the cruise ship. With time running short, Doug decided he would board the ship himself to disarm the bomb, while Claire would call for backup. Meanwhile, after making his preparations, Erstad was about to leave the docks when he spotted his own bullet-ridden vehicle. Realizing Doug and the others must have tracked him down too, he quickly returned to the cruise ship to ensure the bombing went ahead as planned. However, this was witnessed by Claire on the shore, who jumped aboard the departing ship out of concern for Doug's safety. But it didn't take long before Erstad discovered and locked her in the car to prevent interference with his plans. At that moment, a patrolling police officer noticed Erstad's suspicious behavior and approached to question him. Unexpectedly, Erstad directly opened fire on the officer. Hearing the gunshots, Doug rushed over, but could not act recklessly with Claire still held hostage and being outgunned. As the standoff dragged on, Doug suddenly had an idea. He distracted Erstad while hinting to Claire to take the opportunity to attack.
Patriotism requires sacrifice.
I'm willing to sacrifice.
You're willing to sacrifice others, but not yourself. Who are you, Orstat?
It's not supposed to be this way.
Sure enough, when Erstad was momentarily diverted, Claire floored the gas pedal, managing to subdue him. Doug then finished him off with his own gun. Erstad was dead. But by now, there were only 2 minutes until detonation. To save everyone's lives, they had no choice but to drive the rigged car into the water. With Doug's help, Claire was able to escape, but when it was his turn, he ran out of time. Accompanied by the violent explosion, Doug remained forever at the bottom of the sea. Back on the cruise ship, Claire was devastated. But then, a police officer approached saying an explosives expert would be coming to debrief her soon. What Claire never could have imagined was that this so-called expert was actually the Doug from this timeline. In the final scene, the two exchanged smiles and the movie ended.
How you doing? That's right. Have we met?
Yeah. What if you had to tell someone the most important thing in the world, but you knew they'd never believe you?
I tried. Nah.